Hi, Howard.
Your
Hello.
head is cut off.
Oh, is it? Okay, that's why I had to adjust. Let me
Oh, there's your whole head.
see. Okay, great.
Okay, great.
I hear an echo coming from there. Have you turned up the volume too high on your side?
Am I echoing?
A little bit. I thought I could hear myself in a little bit. It'll be better for the interview if it's not as echoey.
Okay, I just turned it down.
Okay.
Is it too soft?
Yes. No, this is good. Now I don't hear the echo anymore.
Okay.
All right. So we'll get started. So Howard, welcome back again. The last time that we talked was before Christmas, and now there's Christmas and New Year's, and so how is the New Year going for you?
Um, Good. I'm getting tired of winter. I wish it were spring. I have some daffodils poking out of the ground, and they're way premature because we got snow last night. We're going to get snow again today, and
Yeah,
but they're eager to have life.
you have to come out. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Similar situation here. We had kind of early start for the snow, and then now it is kind of the snow is gone, and it looks like spring except it's cold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so let's jump into the interview. So the last two times that we talked, if you remember, I started by saying I want to sort of build a worldview out of this. Like now we live in a digital age, and people are come to expect a lot of reliability out of disciplines. Like uh, where we're going with GPS and the reviews for hotels and all this sort of thing. So religion, I claim that it doesn't meet up to the standards expected of by the modern people, which in part has to do with the lack of popularity of religious beliefs. So that's why in the last two interviews we spent a lot of time on the book of Genesis. I asked you questions about creation and the Adam and Eve and marriage and sin and all this stuff. And we created an outline out of it. And the last time I did ask you what was the biggest sin that you did that earned you hell. And the reason that I'm asking you is that I've seen in other interviews that you've done that people would ask you this question. You thought that you're a good guy.
Right.
Yeah. And if you look at our culture, we all think of ourselves as good guys, and we go about our life, modulated by the values and structure of the culture. So now I want to ask the same question again. I want to ask a little bit more about these concepts of sin and all this, a little bit on the book of Genesis, and then maybe the later half of the interview, I want to go back to your experience itself that you had on the other side. It's also very interesting to know about the other side itself. Theology is one thing, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter as much as get to where you should go. So anyway, now let me ask you that question again about sin. If you were to examine our culture today, what are some of the biggest sins that you think people need to correct?
Well, I think that what Jesus told me and what I've read from the Bible is I turned away from God when I was around 14, 15 years old and became a person who denied that there was a God, denied that Jesus was anything, denied that the Bible was of any importance at all. And I was very, in time, by the time when I was 17, my first philosophy course in college was an atheist professor who really supported my atheism, and by that time I became a very anti-Christian, anti-God atheist. Now, I just want to make a little aside. I think that there was a part of me deep down inside which I would absolutely not have admitted. I would have denied it angrily, that there was any hope or belief in God, but I believe that it was deep down inside of me somewhere, but not on a conscious level.
Yeah.
On a conscious level, I knew that the whole God thing was foolishness. So when I was a university professor, I let people know. I mentioned that, for example, in 1973, I was still in my first year as a university professor. I had a nun enroll in a class, Sister Mary Dolores. And the first day of class, which we don't do any content, it's like, general, go over the syllabus and attendance and all that stuff. I told her I needed to see her after class, and she came to me, and I told her, I said, I just want you to know I'm an atheist. I don't allow any religion in my classroom.
Yeah.
I don't want you to talk about any religion in my classroom. And she said, no, I'm not here for that. I'm just here to learn how to paint. I'm not here to convert anybody. And I said, well, as long as you do that, we're going to get along just fine.
Yeah.
And we became very good friends. And she's the one that prayed for me for 13 years.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I didn't actually know she was praying for me. Anyways, so my sin, the technical definition of sin is to intentionally alienate yourself or separate yourself from God. I did that intentionally. I did it consciously, rationally, clearly, willfully. I separated myself from God. I think that's my greatest sin, and I think it's also, a sin that's very common in our society. And I consider people that are apathetic to God to be just as guilty of sin as the people that are outspokenly opposed to God, atheists.
That's very interesting. What you're saying is what the sin in this case is not a particular action. If we examine the history of the Christian church, like for example, the Catholic Church had this idea of mortal sins, and they defined some things like lust and greed and pride, gluttony, all this stuff was in the list of mortal sins. And now you're saying that was in the top of the list. What was on the top of the list was a volitional thing within your heart that you wanted to intentionally separate yourself from God and then go about your life.
Right, but
Yeah.
it's biblical. It's really biblical. For example, a question that I get asked a lot is, Jesus said that sin against the Holy Spirit is unforgivable.
Yes.
And I get that question quite a bit, surprisingly. And people ask me, what does it mean, and if they've done it, and what are the consequences? Well, I've studied it a lot, and I've prayed about it a lot, and I believe with certainty that what Jesus was referring to was the sin of blasphemy, which is in the Ten Commandments. And the word blasphemy is often misunderstood in our society because blasphemy does not have anything to do with vulgarity. People think that blasphemy is saying dirty words, and that's not blasphemy. That's just being vulgar. And vulgar means to be common or cheap. Blasphemy is using the Lord's name in a vain, empty way.
Yeah.
And so if I were to say to you, for example, if you aren't nice to me, God's going to strike you with lightning right now, and fry you. That's blasphemy. I mean, I'm using an absurd example, but
yes.
Because I have no right to say such a thing, So, we blaspheme when we try and control other people, when we try and make them behave in ways that we want them to behave. Like, if you do this and you do that, God's going to send you to hell. God's going to hate you. God's going to get you for it. I mean, how many people have said, God will get you if you do that?
Well, that's what I was saying about the church. That was their definition of sin, is basically based on actions. And we can argue that the Christian church itself was engaged in blasphemy based on your definition.
Well, on the good side was they were trying to control people's behavior to make people more moral, but maybe the way they're going about it was the wrong way to go about it.
So this is interesting what you're saying. Sometimes when I was a fresh Christian, I used to think that it's a lot of actions that constitute sin, and you do well steering clear of those sort of things. The problem with that is it never works out in the long term. You'll break a law. You'll break all the laws at some point. So then I just got cynical about the whole thing and said, well, why? What difference does it make how many times you break this law? Is it based on some kind of minimum grade that you have to earn? And that's and
Yeah,
then you go back the other way and say, no, it's actually based on faith and grace and all this stuff, which is actually the truth. That's what I believe. That's the only
yeah,
thing that makes sense anyway.
yeah. And Jesus talks about sin is based on our intention. It's not necessarily our action. Like he says that if you lust after a woman in your heart, you've committed adultery. You know, you don't actually have to have an affair
Right.
with that woman to be an adulterer. If you're sitting around,
Yeah.
thinking about doing it, you're doing it.
Yes, so that is sin though. Based on
Yeah.
Jesus' definition, that is sin. It's not
Yeah.
blasphemy to lust after a woman, but it is nevertheless sin according to what he said.
Yeah, and
Right.
once again, since I brought it up, I've got to say something about that. People
Yeah.
people think that sexual thoughts are lust. They are not necessarily lust. Lust means, according to the dictionary, excessive sexual desire. Therefore, we have to understand what does it mean to have excessive sexual desire. I am a heterosexual male, and God wired me up to be a sexual being. I like women a lot, and I have rarely in my life found a woman that I didn't find somewhat attractive to. Some more than others. I mean, I like women,
Yeah.
and and every heterosexual man that I've talked to has the same struggle.
Yeah.
They say, "Oh, am I going to go to hell because I have these thoughts about women?" I said, only if they're excessive. You got to watch where you go with your thoughts. You got to be careful with your thoughts. Control your thoughts. Like I like money.
Yeah.
Money's fun. It's nice to have money. I can buy nice things with money, but I can't lust after money.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bad thing, right?
Yes.
But having some money around is a good thing. And it's like drinking. The Bible prohibits drunkenness. Does not prohibit drinking.
Yeah, but this is a sliding, slippery slope. That's
Yes.
kind of how everything in life is. You can say, well, too much lust is bad. Well, too much
Yeah.
is a relative term.
Yeah.
Too much for some is not too much for others. So you can just say, well, that's just this is all subjective. This is kind of what people actually think about all these issues. In my opinion, our culture, they have the ability to think as much, and then they come to the same sort of conclusion. Everything sits on a sort of slippery slope. Who knows what the fine line is, and then they just go about their life. And this is the culture that we have, which incidentally is also has or had or has or had, I don't know, has turned hostile to religion in that process. So it seems to
Yeah.
me that these actions that you do, it's not just innocent. Somewhere along the way you are going against part of your conscience that says probably you shouldn't do it, and that may be the willful intentional rebellion against God that you're talking about. This
Yeah.
ties in with that idea of conservative versus liberal that I brought up last time too. It's not just politics is going to save the day, but there is a theological line that divides these two groups, and I
Hmm.
understand it because I think about this too, and I see that in my own life. So that's why I brought all this up. So again, I think you did answer the question. So I asked the question: what are the biggest sins in the culture? You're saying that a volitional rejection of God is what is primary on the list of sin, and
Right.
the lesser things that what I would have thought, greed and pride and all this, you didn't mention any of that stuff.
Yeah. And
Sex, lust, yeah.
I would say another huge sin is hypocrisy.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
and a friend of mine, I belong to a couple of clergy groups, and a friend of mine who's a pastor was telling me of a funny experience he had recently. He was asked to do a funeral of a person that was a homosexual. And the mother of that young man who died was a very faithful member of a conservative church in his town. And so he went, the funeral was at a funeral parlor, my friend, and he went and he did the funeral. He knew the family, although they didn't go to his church, he knew them, and that's why he got asked to do this. And found out that the pastor of their church who came to the funeral would not do the funeral because he was opposed to homosexuality, and he refused. He refused to do the funeral.
Yeah.
And when these two pastors met, the conservative pastor told my friend, oh no, that guy's going to hell. I wouldn't have anything to do with him. And my friend was saying, yeah, but what about the mother? I mean, she deserves compassion for the death of her son. That's why I'm here. Because to help the mother, not to condemn the son. And I goes, no, we won't have anything to do with it.
Oh, wow.
He said, so when the funeral was over, there were many people from the mother's church there in respect to the mother. And as soon as the funeral was over, they went out in the parking lot and opened up a cooler full of beer, and they all started drinking beer in the middle of the day in the parking lot.
Yeah.
And he was like, really? I mean, that's these people that are so morally upright, go rushing out to drink beer in the parking lot, in the middle of the day. You just thought it was really funny.
Yes. So, yes, it is. So I understand your point about hypocrisy, And, again, theologically, I don't know if that guy is just innocent. This is his limited understanding of sin. This is why we're discussing all this stuff. Maybe this pastor has a very limited understanding of what sin is. In his mind, certain actions are mortal sins, and, there's the ability to corrupt and destroy a culture and your belief in God altogether. So maybe that's why they're opposed to certain boundaries in life. But,
Yeah.
but if you think hard enough about it, you understand that this is not, it's not as cut and dry. Actions after all, do contribute to sin, but everybody is about in the 99th percentile of sinners when it comes down to it. It doesn't matter how you cut and slice all this stuff. So,
Yep.
right. So, okay. So that is good. Now, it is surprising. I have to say that your answer is surprising. I had thought that you would maybe say that our sexual licentiousness in this culture maybe would be in the list of sins, but you didn't mention anything about it. So what is your opinion about sex outside marriage and things like that? Does that contribute sin or is not sin?
Well, I want to say that I know that God is more interested in the quality of our relationships than we are ourselves. God is be specific now. God is very interested in how I treat my wife. God is very interested in how I treat my family and how my colleagues and and the people that come to. He's more interested in those things than I am interested in them.
Yeah.
But in terms of the sexual activity between me and my wife, God is not interested in it at all. He's no more interested in that than what I do first thing when I get out of bed in the morning and go into the bathroom. He's not interested in that stuff.
Right. Is he interested at all that if you had multiple wives or if you're a polygamist, does he care?
I think he would care because I personally, I can hardly do justice to my relationship with one wife. I'm not making a big confession. I'm just being honest that I should be a better spouse, a better husband to my wife than I am. I should be more loving, more kind, more patient, more generous, etc., etc. I'm trying. John, I tell you, I'm really, really trying to be a good husband, but I fail. Sometimes I lose my patience. Sometimes I get angry. Sometimes I just don't want to listen to her anymore and let her know it, and just like, and I'm sorry that I do those things, and I try not to do it. I don't see how I could possibly handle 2, 3, 4 women. I don't get it at all. I don't see it.
I mean, you don't have to go down this path, but I suppose some people could rationalize by saying that, well, it's not, it doesn't matter how many wives you have, if you can take care of all of them, and, you'll be nasty to them at some point, and you'll be nice to them at some point, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, you take care of 3 or 4 women and have a larger family. This is more consistent with what God wants you to do, the whole concept of love and all this, and therefore you can go down this path and justify polygamy and a large family and things like that.
In our Judeo-Christian tradition, polygamy was acceptable to the early fathers of our faith, and then somewhere along the line we came up with the idea that no, it had to be monogamous relationships.
Yeah, I don't know what the basis of that is. Most people would say Christianity has a lot to do with it, and even in a place like India, there's a little aside. In India, when we got independence, there's a good author by name Vishal Mangalwadi. I don't know if you heard that name.
No.
Okay, he has written a book in America called the book. Written a couple of books. One of them is called The Book That Made Your World. It's about he's a Christian. He grew up in India and he lived with the poor people in India, and then he studied in the library, and then he came to the U.S. Has a lot of experience, going around and speaking and working with. It's not an armchair academic sort of thing, like real
Yeah.
life thing. So he's written this book, and in there he actually talks about the issue of monogamy and stuff. And I had actually asked him some questions over email and stuff, and he did instantly mention when India had actually got independence, it used to be a British colony, and then when they got independence, it was difficult for them to write the constitution, and they could not write the monogamy into the law because at that time, based on Indian culture, many Brahmins, which is like the highest class of the Indian
Yeah.
society, had multiple wives. They
No, I
would
didn't know
have like
that. Oh.
50 wives, so
What?
they could not.
What?
Yes,
Really?
yes.
Oh, that's a
So
lot of women.
they so they couldn't write that in. So his point was it took, and the way the Constitution got written was they actually borrowed all these ideas out of the American Constitution and so on. So these ideas, they come out of Christianity and get planted into other cultures. Cultures in the absence of Christianity do not by themselves see it self-evident that men should be monogamous. So these things don't have much value to them.
Yeah.
Even in Islam, even today, I think the religion itself sanctions for up to 4 wives.
Yeah.
If you're pagan, I don't know where you get monogamy from. So people are glad to argue, especially nowadays in America, a lot of confusion about this whole subject. People are, going back to the roots and saying that Jesus talked about man shall live as woman and shall become one flesh and all this stuff. So Jesus approved of the monogamous marriage and so on. So
Have you ever heard anywhere, because I have never heard of anywhere in the world where women had multiple husbands? Seems like,
it won't work out because the husbands would kill each other over the
yeah,
woman.
yeah,
Women can put up with a lot of shit, but not men. That's
yeah.
why it never works out that way. Anyway, so that's good. So let's now. I think we are about 20 minutes into the interview. Maybe I'm thinking we can jump into your experience itself from the other side. So it's an interesting thing that so you said when you're in that hospital in Paris, and then you suddenly saw yourself standing up next to the bed, and then people came outside the room and called your name, and that you started walking. And I think I also heard somewhere in one interview or something you did mention it was actually a really long walk. If you were to recreate that walk in our plane, you would be like walking between two distant cities, right?
Yes,
I think
yes.
um, so one question that I had was when you stood up and when you're walking, do you have the experience of the physical self, such as yourself with two hands and two legs and body parts and eyes, nose, all this stuff? Did you feel like you're a human being?
Oh, even more so. The first thing that I noticed after in my opinion, when I died and left my body, the first thing that I noticed that my senses were all heightened. I could hear, smell, see, taste, feel more acutely than I'd ever before in my life. For example, one of the first things I noticed, the floor of that hospital room was old linoleum squares.
Yep.
And I was thinking to myself, through the soles of my feet, that I could feel the detail of the lump. I mean, linoleum looks smooth, right? Linoleum appears to be very smooth.
Yes.
I could feel its lumpiness, and I was like very excited. I was very excited about the fact that the linoleum had a very real slippery texture to it.
So
And then I noticed in Paris at that time, I don't know if they still do it, they collected the urine in these big, maybe 3 or 4 gallon glass jars at the foot of the bed. There was a metal rack that held these big glass jars. And when you urinated in your urinal, then they would dump it into this great big bottle at the end of your bed. So obviously so that they could account for what your output was.
Yeah.
And I was new at the hospital and I hadn't made any urine, but my roommate had been there quite a while, and his bottle was more than half full of urine. And the one of the first things I noticed was I could smell the smell of his urine very strong in my nose. And I was going,
That's funny.
his name was Monsieur Florin. I go, boy, and I was saying, boy, Monsieur Florin, your urine stinks, you know. He had not wet himself. It was just the odor coming out of that bottle. And then I was thinking about how I saw, and because I was an artist, I was very aware of vision, and I noticed that I had full focus both close and far, and that my range of vision was much greater than it had been before. So I was seeing with great clarity and with a very large field of vision.
Right. So when you said you could feel through the soles, what are we talking about? Do you have the shoes on? Did you
No,
have
no,
shoes?
I was barefoot. I was barefoot.
Right. So on the skin or whatever
Yeah.
equivalent in the other world, you could feel the floor. So it seemed like were you constrained by gravity? Did you feel like you could fly away if you wanted, or you could
No,
you were
no,
stuck?
absolutely not.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I felt, I felt normal, except that everything was heightened, just more than usual.
Hmm. And you started walking when they called out your name.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of place are we walking? Normally, if I say I started walking, I can walk for some distance inside this house. Would be hardwood and carpet and so on. Then
Yeah.
I would have to step outside, which would be snow, and then there will be pavement and all this stuff. What kind of material were you walking? What is it made of? Does it look like man-made or something
No,
else?
it felt like I went out of the room, through the doorway of the room, out into the hallway, and it was like the same surface. But the thing that happened was when I went into the hallway, there was much less light, and there was very little color, almost no color at all. Things were basically all gray, tones of gray. And I thought that was very strange. It troubled me a great deal because the room had been very light. The lights were on in the room, although it was night, it had fluorescent lights. But when I went into the hallway, it was dingy, dark, gray. And as we walked down the hallway, I became aware fairly soon that I wasn't seeing any architectural features. Like, for example, I became aware that I couldn't perceive walls or ceiling or anything. The only thing that I was aware of was the floor that we were walking on and the people that were surrounding me. So my vision was obstructed by them. But as we walked further and further, it occurred to me, this is ridiculous, because there's no way this hospital is this big, because we were walking and walking and walking. We never went up, down, right, left. We just kept walking. What
So it's
I
just
thought was
just
a
a
straight.
right. So you're basically walking straight, and you can't see what's around you, right? But you could feel what's below you, right? What did it feel like? Did it feel like wooden floor or pavement or nothing you have felt before? What did it feel like?
Just it just seemed like the same floor that I had been on.
Oh wow, it's weird. Yeah, I had thought about it. And did you feel like you had clothes on, or were you like
I
totally naked?
I had I had the hospital gown, which is a funny term for what they put on you in a hospital, because it's you know this too short sleeve
Yeah.
built into it, and then if you put it on properly, um, the openings in the back, and there's usually 3 or 4 ties in the back. Well,
Mm-hmm.
my gown had been put on when I was completely naked in the bed, and they had only tied around my neck. The other ties were open, and I was very aware that my buttocks were exposed because I could feel the air on my buttocks because the gown wasn't covering. Since it was only tied at my neck, I could feel that it was, open below
Yeah.
that. And I was very aware of my, now I was, every once in a while I'd grab the back of the gown and try and close it, but you can't, it was
Yeah.
too awkward walking around with my hand behind my back trying to keep my gown closed. And I didn't have the presence of mind to
Yeah. This is so
reach around
strange
and try
because
and tie it.
Yes, this is really strange because your body that was on the bed would have had the same gown on it,
Yes, yes.
except the replica of you, however that was created, all seemed to have made a copy of the cloth for some reason. I wonder if you had
Well,
shoes on,
my under
the shoes would have come with you.
no,
I don't know.
no,
Huh?
my understanding of it was that when we die, we carry our consciousness of who and what we are with us.
Yes.
And so since I was a materialist and what I thought was a highly rational person, I carried that with me. I was like an exact replica of what I'd been in life. Um, I think that, I'd like to think that in my next adventure into the other world, that I will have a higher understanding of who and what I am, and I will have more uh, supernatural characteristics and aspirations.
Okay. No, I was wondering why the cloth, that hospital gown, came with you. I was wondering.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I would have thought. I thought I didn't know. First of all, what it meant that you felt like yourself. I didn't know if you
when,
felt like you had human form,
yeah.
just the same way.
When
And
when I met
okay.
when I met Jesus later on in the experience, I didn't have a gown. I was completely naked.
Completely naked.
And when I met the angels, I was very naked, and I kept my hands. When I met the angels, I tried to keep one of my hands over my genitals because I didn't want them to see my genitals because I thought
Yeah.
that was shameful. They
Yeah.
laughed at. They thought that was funny.
Funny. Yeah. It's probably like a cat trying to cover himself in
Yeah.
front of a
And
human
and
being.
you know what they said?
There's no.
They said to me. They said, "You don't have to worry about that. We've seen it before, Metaquack. We've seen lots of them. You don't have anything that can surprise us or interest us."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, really? You're not interested? That's good." We
Yeah.
all
It
laughed.
is strange. So, um, so that this is an interesting question, and so that okay. So now we have gotten past that, the details about what it means to be like human in the other world. Now, my other question is going to be about hell. Now, you had encountered these spirits, and they were wild, evil spirits that uh, fed off of the torment, and they were basically sadists, right? They
Yeah,
inflict torment on other people, and they feed off of it. This is the sad situation that they found themselves in. And I can actually see that there's some elements of humanity. It is like that. We are protected by our freedoms, but not everybody wants us to have these freedoms.
right,
And if the freedoms were to be taken away, they would basically feed off of our. They want to, bring us down to their levels. There
right,
are people like that. So
right.
it's not hard for me to understand this concept. Um, Now, the question of hell. Now, you yourself hadn't been taken into to see the vastness of hell as it exists. First of all, do you believe that there exists such a place as hell, where there is fire and demons and devils, and they're engaged in torturing human souls and things like that, or do you don't know anything about it?
Well, I believe there's a hell, but I don't. Um, I think that the some of the popular images of hell are childish. The torment of hell, the fire of hell, I believe is what's going on inside the person more than something external.
Hmm.
I don't think, I think the people are roasting in torment, not roasting in, 1,000-degree heat. You know?
It's interesting. So this is part of the reason why religion is confusing like crazy. This is now you just said that this is a self-induced torment. C.S. Lewis wrote in his book. I forget the name of the book. It's like a concept of a bus going somewhere, and
Yeah,
people are in
the
their own
great divorce.
self-induced hell. Yeah, great divorce, and eventually they end up in some big void place, devoid of God, and this is hell and so on. And now we have a whole set of people, maybe because again of the digital age and so on, maybe they always existed. We just don't know. Now they are online. We can see their testimony. People like Mary Catherine Baxter,
Yeah,
Bill Weiss, I think
yeah,
his name
right.
is. Bill Weiss, many other people, and there's actually a couple of Indian people that I have heard too. There's a priest by name Jose Maniankat. This guy, he's now in the United States. He does, he ministers to people in high security prisons and things like that. But his near-death experience happened 30 years or even more ago, in the 1970s sometime, and long before we had internet and all these things. And it's an
Right.
incredible testimony in itself also. And he was escorted into hell, where he saw a vast open space where there were people being tormented. This talks about 2,000-degree fire and torment and destruction and that type of thing. And so when you read his testimony, I cannot judge between his testimony and yours. Both seem to me to be equally true in terms of the authenticity with you guys speak. They seem to be both true. The thing is, both cannot be right. It cannot be just self-induced torment as opposed to being thrown into the fire like in the World Trade Tower.
Yeah.
So both of them cannot be true. So I often wonder. After examining this and listening to this, I tend to think that actually does exist.
Well, I just read something interesting today. Someone referred me to a Catholic priest in the 1800s who had a vision of hell, and his name is Father John, but he's Italian, so his Italian name is Giovanni, but in English, John Bosco, Bosco. And I just read his account of his vision or experience of hell. And the very last sentence that he wrote was, he said, and I thought that this was brilliant. He writes this very kind of medieval tour of hell, with the torments and tortures and all that stuff. And he said, no one can actually describe the torment of hell. So we use these images to try and explain it, but they really are beyond description. And I really like that because one of the ways that I evaluate people's near-death experiences, which I do, evaluate other NDEs that I read, was whether they talk about the ineffability of the experience, because the whole experience is beyond words. It's outside of human experience, outside of human vocabulary. So we talk about things that we do not have words to express. Like the simplest thing, for example, I talk about the journey into hell was like this really long journey, like walking from this city to another city. But that's all imagery. It's not, I'm a painter. I try and paint some of these things, and you can't paint it. You can't even talk about it, but you do want to talk about it. So you use language, you use symbols, you use metaphors, you use images to express things. Like, for example, there's no time in heaven or in hell, but we talk about I was there for a long time. Well, there is no time. So when I say I was there for a long time, that's nonsense. I wasn't there for a long time. I wasn't there for a short time. I wasn't there for no time. I wasn't there for all time. I was there in a whole different dimension of being.
Yeah,
You know?
the concept of time is difficult, and I hadn't thought about it, but now that you brought it up, I'll probably ask you at some point.
Yeah.
But the truth remains that you did have that sensation of walking, where you
Oh yeah.
lifted one foot and put it in front of the
Absolutely.
other.
Absolutely.
So that's what we mean by the term walking. So when
Yeah.
you say you walk, that's what people on this side we understand
And see,
to be walking.
so Father John Bosco says that he saw people being put into cauldrons of boiling bronze, which you mentioned 2,000 degrees. Bronze, I believe, is about 2,200 degrees before it's liquid.
Yeah.
So did he really see cauldrons of boiling bronze, or did he see people in absolutely hellish torment, immersed in something? You know what I mean? He didn't go into the bronze. He didn't have an instrument to measure it. He's not a metallurgist. You can tear his thing apart. But I don't doubt what he saw. He saw. In other words, he's telling the truth with the only language that he knows how to express it.
Yeah, but
And
that
so
is
do
not.
I.
He didn't talk about self-induced torment. He is talking about, in a however simplistic words, and we can, without getting scientific into, the volume of the utensil and the mass and all this sort of thing. In just English speak, he's just saying that he saw people being cooked
Yeah.
in 2000 degree or boiling oil or bronze or whatever it is.
Yeah.
This is enough to terrify the heck out of
Right.
any human being that I
Right.
can imagine. No human being on this planet
Yeah.
would like to go to this place. That,
Right.
so whether it exists should be of huge. I don't know for anything else that people should be more concerned with
Right.
than to concern themselves to know does it exist a hell, and if so, what the hell can we do to
Yeah.
get not go there, not even have to
But
see
to
it.
me, the most interesting point of it all is that we bring it upon ourselves. God does not punish us. We get exactly what we deserve by what we have done with our lives. So if a life of cruelty is reciprocated in the afterlife with more cruelty, a life of love and harmony is reciprocated in the afterlife with a life of love and harmony. Um, that God's justice is perfect. God doesn't have to spank anybody. God's not in the spanking business. He's not in the punishing business. God is so just that what we do, we receive. And that's what the Bible says. You reap what you sow.
You meant, I mean, this is another place where I had difficulty with the philosophy that God doesn't want people to suffer in hell. And
Right?
I heard Christians, use this language by saying, "Oh, the hell wasn't created for human beings; it was created for devil and the angels."
Well, and
So,
also,
therefore,
you know what
yeah, yeah,
you know what makes hell hell? The people
yeah.
that go there. They're the ones that make it hell. It doesn't have to be that bad. It could be a lot more pleasant down there. But you said a while ago that I was meted by a group of sadists. They didn't have to do what they did to me. Nobody was sticking pitchforks into their rear ends, making them attack me. They did that of their own volition because they wanted to do it.
Um, yeah, I tend to see this is yes. So this is where it partly makes sense to me that hell is a place where God just leaves people alone to
Yes,
their own their own devices.
yes,
And
exactly.
when that happens, the real nature of human beings will come out. And there's also already a precedence here. It's, whoever the souls that went before us have created this place where the new recruits will be broken, because this is the state of affairs there. It's almost like, if you went to a place, if you, let's say, to talk about ISIS, since everybody hates ISIS,
Yeah,
if you go to their community and live there, you're not going to live there with preaching freedom and wearing short jeans and just going for a walk in the spring and so on. They want you to like wear the same kind of clothing and hate everything and go about converting the whole world unto themselves. So however that they got into that state,
yeah,
this is a similar situation. The souls that went before you, left to their own devices, they have created a place where the new recruits will be broken down to their level,
right.
and then and they get something out of seeing that let another soul now is just like us. We are not that bad. I see the psychology all around in everything. However depraved individuals are, they get something out of getting converting others onto their side,
Yeah,
getting social approval for whatever it is that they want to do. So and seems to me that this place that you're describing it's about getting social approval. The more the numbers, they don't feel that bad. Maybe this is like a way of them to get back at God by saying, see, the majority is on our side and we are all in hell. It just kind of makes
right,
God look
exactly.
bad.
Yeah, like a really good friend of mine um, lost his job and he needed to get a new job to support his family. So he got a job selling cars. And so this happened recently. I said to my friend, I said, how do you feel about selling cars? Because car salesmen have a reputation for being dishonest. And you're not a dishonest man. You're a very honest man. Um, can you misrepresent the cars and try and get people to buy them when you know you're not saying the truth? He says, no. He said, that's not possible anymore. I said, what do you mean it's not possible anymore? And he said, well, because of the internet, there's so much information about vehicles
Hmm.
that you can't lie about them, because all they have to do is go on the internet and they can find out the truth about vehicles, both new and used. And
Yep.
so there's no more lying. He said, we can't lie about a vehicle. We can't misrepresent a vehicle. We have to tell the truth about the vehicle because people can find out the truth by just going to the internet. So he said, there's no more dishonest salesmen in the reputable car business. We just tell them exactly the way it is, and and the only question is what kind of price they got to pay. That's the only issue. How are you going to finance it? And I thought that was so interesting. So what has happened, and this goes to what you were just saying, that so that the culture of car salesmen has been uplifted because of the internet. We have a culture of factual truth.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. So similarly, the picture of hell could probably be lifted only if they could send heaven into it. The angels and God's own power, which can withstand evil and destroy it. If God could penetrate hell, then all that their culture would be lifted too. Seems to
Yeah.
me that God just took difference with them and left them on their own,
Yeah. So
which they resulted
pray
in.
for
Yeah.
them. I pray
Yeah.
for the people in hell.
It is crazy, like I was saying, there's nothing else. If you're a human being, there's no question that you should obsess over as much as this question of hell. Like you were saying, people, you just go on, look at what people generally talk about at work. They talk about trivial things. How, where to get good bagels and where they're
Yeah.
going on vacation and, all this useless thing. And then you wonder, if there's 2000-degree heat waiting for them, you
Yeah.
would like to know if they're going to talk about,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So the question of hell, I guess at least you didn't get to witness a fiery hell, but there are a lot of people who, like I was saying, their testimonies seem as genuine as yours that have made a claim that they have seen a fiery hell,
Yeah.
and
And
I tend
it
to
may
believe.
well be. I had my very limited experience. I am not the world's authority on hell. I experienced what I experienced. I'm sure that there's a million times more complexities to hell than I
Mm-hmm.
experienced. I experienced one thing, one little part of it. But
Right.
here's the difference. I experienced it. It wasn't a vision. I didn't see it as a spectator. I was in it. And that one thing makes me feel a little bit exceptional, because when I hear people talk about hell, it's always they had a dream about hell, they had a vision about hell, they saw hell from a distance or from a spectator point of view. But did they burn? Were they tormented? Were they torn apart? Were they eaten? Were they raped? Um, you don't hear many of those. That's my testimony.
Yeah, yeah. Bill Weiss says that he was attacked and thrown by a demon, that he was smashed against the wall and all this stuff.
Well,
But the other, yeah,
I talked to Bill Weiss, and he told me that it was a vision. He had 20. His
no,
name of his book is 23 Minutes in Hell. That
yeah,
he was in his bedroom in his house, and all of a sudden he had this vision, and he saw all these things. And I mean,
he,
I'm not here to degrade
right.
him in any way, but when he told me
I
he
will.
had this vision, because I don't describe my experience as a vision.
Yeah, I don't know what it means to say there was a vision when he himself is saying that he was there, and then the demon got hold of him, and he weighed as much as a paper glass to him, and he threw him against the wall, and his bones all cracked and all this stuff. And he's talk about all these things. I can see you can dream all these things as you're sleeping, but that
Yeah,
has no relevance to reality. I don't go about my day based on some nightmare that I had.
right.
If that's all it is, then you should not go around the world talking about a nightmare that he had. The only question is, do you think it is real? It actually
Yeah,
exists.
yeah.
That is the only question that's of
I
relevance
know,
to you.
because that's a comment that people have said to me. They said, how do you know it wasn't a dream? And I said, I have many dreams every night. Every
Mm-hmm.
night I have dreams. I don't remember all my dreams, but when I wake up in the morning, almost all the time I wake up from a dream.
Yep.
I had a dream this morning. I had a dream yesterday morning. And both times I woke up, and I can recall those dreams better when it happens rather than now. I hardly remember them at all. But anyways, I have, what? I have never in my life taken any action at all in my life because I had a dream about it, ever.
Yep. Yep.
I don't,
No.
I don't believe in my dreams. I think that, they can be part of your digestive process. They can be, in my case, the ones that wake me up usually have to do with a full bladder.
Yeah,
Uh,
it does
and
happen to me too. Yes.
sometimes it has to do with I'm working out anxieties, fears, hopes, fantasies,
Yep.
Um,
Yes, we understand the concept of dream,
yeah,
but people don't take that too seriously and go about their lives. Anyway, but the point of what we hope to learn from the Bible, and we go to church and study from the gospel and salvation and all this stuff. it's not because it makes us feel good. This is about reality.
Yeah,
To me, at least, as an engineer, I have no interest in fantasy and fiction and that sort of thing. I just like to know the facts,
yeah.
and then figure out what I need to do with my life or anything else. This is good. So I think we are at 50 minutes. Next thing that I wanted to ask you was about heaven. I'm wondering if we can maybe do that another time. Um, do you think you have enough to talk about heaven at some point? Or
Oh, yeah.
okay, did you
Jesus,
enjoy?
Jesus
Yes,
showed me a lot about heaven. He
yeah.
showed me things about it.
Yes. So one other thing, you mentioned earlier that you said cruelty will earn you hell. Now, when I look at the world, many things might count as cruelty. For example, some people might say that killing animals is cruel, even to eat. There's a whole movement about, like, right now in India, it's actually illegal to kill cows. You could get arrested. In
Uh-huh.
most states, it's like that, and that's a Hindu philosophy of so it's only for cows, but nevertheless, it's a Hindu philosophy of ahimsa and all this stuff, kindness, that kind of thing. And also the fact that God is revered in some fashion through connection with some of the deities as also holy and so on. But killing animals can be construed as cruel. And what about the issue of abortion? I actually do think abortion is a cruel thing, and this
I
I think
agree.
maybe
I agree.
agree. So then that is something that could earn you hell based on what you said.
Yeah.
It's counts as a
The,
cruel act.
the thing
Yeah.
that's disturbing in our culture is that um, the people that are opposed to abortion, and I am opposed to abortion, don't see one of the ways to prevent abortion is birth control. And the main people that are in the right to life movement are opposed to birth control. They're opposed to all forms of contraception. And to me, it's illogical. One of the um, worst forms of abortion is people use abortion as a form of birth control. Now,
Yeah,
they
that's
don't
not.
care whether they get pregnant or not because they just go have an abortion and then they get rid of the baby that way. Um, and we have, in our lifetime, we have figured out how to prevent pregnancy. And there's a whole variety of ways to do this. And why are we not allowing people access to birth control
No,
and
it's not
preventing
because of
abortion?
yeah, it's not because we are disallowing access to birth control that people get pregnant anyway. It's because of the way some people run their lives is like this. They just go about their life and then they get it on and then they get pregnant and then there's oops. Now how do you get rid of it? Then that's the baby cannot speak for herself or cannot fight back. So this is where the rubber meets the road,
Yeah.
kind of thing. It always everything in life, unless there's a pushback, if there's no consequence, then something will get slapped upon you.
But
That's how it is.
let me give you a little instance of the importance of birth control. In this little village in Central America where I've worked for many, many years called
Hmm.
San Victor, Belize, very, very poor Maya mestizo Indian village. And the people told me that in the old days, a woman would get pregnant and have as many babies as she could possibly have. It was not uncommon for a woman to get pregnant and to have 15, 20 babies.
Hmm.
Of those babies, if a handful, if 3 or 4 survived, that was like great. That was a lot.
Right. Yeah.
Um, some of them were miscarriages. A lot of them died in childbirth, and a lot of them died in infancy.
Yeah.
And the women that had big families, they couldn't afford to feed all those children. Many children died of starvation.
Hmm.
Um, today, in the last 10 or 20 years, since I've been going to the village, as far as I know, and this is from talking to women that I've gotten to know on a very close basis, because they don't trust strangers, but I'm not a stranger anymore down there.
Right.
All the women in that village use birth control because they do not want to be like what they saw happen to their mothers and grandmothers, of just being always pregnant. And you know what happens to the women that have all these babies? They die too, right?
Yeah.
Because childbirth there's no hospital, there's no doctor, there's no medicine, no doctor, no medicine, no hospital, period.
Yep.
So a lot of women died in childbirth. So the women have wised up. They don't want to be pregnant all the time. They don't want to have 20 babies and see all these babies die. So the average family in San Victor Village now is about two, and a big family is like three. The women want to have two children. That's enough. They all use birth control. Almost everybody in the village is Roman Catholic. They all know that the church tells them that that's a sin to use birth control. And you know what? They say, I don't care. I'm not going to get pregnant all the time.
That's how people are in general, and this is how you get the loss of religion altogether. When people start saying, I don't care, maybe the next thing that they do is, well, I know the church tells me you shouldn't have sex until you're married, but I don't care. Then you go on down the line, well, the church tells me I should not do homosexuality. Well, I don't care. Then the
Yeah.
church tells me I should not be
But
transgender or
but
commit
how
suicide.
can how can the
Anything is
church
just,
condemn these women to being perpetually pregnant like their mothers and grandmothers?
Yes, it is a sad situation. I understand what you're saying, and this actually, I thought about this whole, the infancy death thing too. And when I think about some of these things, it actually, it makes me believe that God. This is. I asked you one time, did God intend for us to suffer in this world? When I look at all these things, there's no doubt that that is what God wants to do.
Yes.
Either that or he did a poor job. He doesn't care too much about all the details.
No, he wants us
That's
to.
it.
Suffering is good for us. Suffering is a very, very valuable tool.
Then why
Without,
should we
without
give birth
suffering,
control?
we'd never learn anything. We'd never understand anything. You have to have the polarity of like reward and punishment. You have to have the polarity of good and evil. You have to have the polarity of um, resistance and lack of resistance.
This gets us into Hindu philosophy of Advaita, which they actually don't believe there's good and evil, and they look at this the same way. With some sophistication, you can rationalize that only good is not good for human character. So therefore bad is not really bad. So evil and death and destruction is all part of the same thing. There's no such thing as good or evil. All is one.
Uh-huh.
That's the philosophy called Advaita, which is not the same as Christian philosophy. I'm not an
Yeah.
Advaitist, even though I'm from India. I've worked with a couple of people like that. Anyway, so let's maybe wrap up the interview here, and if you oblige, we can set another one up. We can talk about heaven and
Yeah.
things like that. I just want to make sure that you enjoy doing these interviews and not imposing upon you to do. No.
Mr. Binto, you're a very wise man. It's fun to talk with you.
Okay, good. Okay, great. So then I'll set up another one in due time, and then we'll talk again. Okay.
Good.
Thank you, Albert.
God bless you, John.
Like you too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.